I think the idea of a journal has been degraded to the point that we have predatory journals, body snatcher journals, gaslight journals, mega journals. They aren't really focused on any particular audience. You're in love with whatever technology is, the latest fad or the latest trend.
Welcome to Insights Exchange, where we explore the crossroads of research, publishing, and innovation. I'm your host, Nikesh. I'm going to kick things off with my favorite fun fact about open access of late. In the last decade, more than half of all scholarly articles published globally are now open access. Sounds like progress, right? But behind that statistic is a more complex story, one of shifting power dynamics, fragile trust, and competing priorities. That's why today's episode is such an important one. We are joined by two brilliant minds who've seen scholarly publishing from every angle: editorial, strategic, operational, and critical. First, we have Kent Anderson, a publishing veteran and respected industry commentator. Kent Anderson is the founder and former editor-in-chief of the Scholarly Kitchen. He's the founder of Caldera Publishing Solutions and has been a publisher at AAAS and NEGM. He's also the author of The Geyser. His new book, How the Internet Disrupted Science, will offer a provocative look at how digital technologies have reshaped scholarly publishing. And alongside him, we are thrilled to welcome Joy Moore, an experienced executive with deep expertise in strategic planning, operational leadership, and publishing innovation. Joy's work bridges legacy systems and future-forward change. Together, Kent and Joy will help us examine where scholarly publishing stands today and where it needs to go next. Welcome, Kent and Joy.
Thank you much, Nikesh.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for making time. Brilliant. Let's get started with a quick temperature check. If you had to give scholarly publishing a health rating right now, where would you place it? And what do you think is driving that score?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's an important one, and health is an important area to talk about actually in this because it's an area where there's a lot of trespass going on. I would actually, for an industry, I would call for an intervention at this point because I think it's time for us to take a hard look at what has happened over the past 20 years or so, and that's what we were doing in our book, and that's what has driven a lot of the observations that I've been making for the past decade or so. I think we've been sedentary. I think we look like we've been hanging out with tech geeks instead of science geeks. We haven't been outdoors and exploring. We haven't been hiking, and we haven't been climbing mountains. We've been eating too much junk food. We've not been doing enough exercise. We're not interacting with enough people. There's too much screen time. We've developed some strange ideological fixations. And I think we have difficulty performing basic tasks. I think we've forgotten what our job is. Joy and I wrote our book because we're concerned about how tech culture has been elevated over science culture. And tech norms have trampled scientific norms and processes. And I think that's led to an overall decline in the health of our industry and a kind of a lost sense of purpose. We've kind of lost our sense of purpose.
Yeah, we definitely would not give it a clean bill of health and a green light to proceed as usual at this point. And this is a good time to stop and reflect, which is why we wrote the book, which became even more relevant in the last few months as we were putting the final touches on it.
Thanks, Kent and Joy. And I'll come back to some more details about the book because I'm very curious, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are as well. But maybe just to talk a little bit about your roles that you've played. Now, both of y'all have had leadership roles across editorial, strategy, operations. And from your perspective, in your view, where are the biggest structural weaknesses or blind spots in current publishing workflows?
Yeah, so I'll tackle it first. I think to me, the biggest problem right now is a lack of disclosure. And I think that's a shame. That shows to me how we've lost our sense of purpose. I think publishers emerged as independent evaluators to take things back to communities after they'd gone through a process of making sure there weren't conflicts of interest, that there weren't self-dealing aspects to it, that it was something that the community could trust. And I think we aren't disclosing who's paying APCs in open access articles. I think that's one of the biggest problems right now. Editors should know who's funding every aspect of a study and its publication. Readers should be told who has funded the publication of this work. Staff should be able to track these things and generate reports. Boards and governance bodies should have insights into who is actually providing them the money behind their OA revenues. I think it's a hidden layer in workflows. I think it permeates and poisons organizations. I think it's led to a lot of bad behavior because there's no need to disclose who's paid for it. And so a lot of bad actors are able to hide behind that. And I think it's indefensible for every reason, in my opinion. So that's what I think the biggest flaw is right now. The workflow is incomplete.
So I started 30 years ago this year, actually, for my first job in scholarly publishing was working in an editorial office of a peer-reviewed biomedical society-owned research journal and developed one of the first online peer review systems. And I understand speed and metrics as being at the heart of importance in scholarly and particularly scientific research. But I think today we've taken the bias towards speed to an unhealthy extreme. And so looking at the focus on speed at every stage in the workflow, from authors being able to submit all the way through publishing the version of record, whatever that might be online, has actually proven counterproductive. Focusing on the metrics around speed have led to some unintended consequences. And speed is not the same thing as efficiency. It causes publishers to rely more on things like errata, corrections, and retractions. Things that we rarely used to see are now commonplace. Even so, they're largely ineffective when you try to correct something after it's already been published online a couple different places and perhaps with a preprint. You're not really correcting it. And the automation that we put in place to speed a lot of the downstream deposits, automated assignments of identifiers have sped things up, but have also introduced a lot of associations and errors that are practically impossible to completely correct. And that's something that we call in the book the automated box of confusion that we've created in the pursuit of speed and to take as many human hands out of the process. And so the upstream gains for speed really lie with the publishers. They control the supply chain. They control most of the money that gets spent on the infrastructure, and they also control most of the revenue. But what this emphasis on speed has done is shifted a lot of the burden downstream to basically putting a lot of quality control requirements in the hands of a number of independent, disaggregated players like sleuths, commenters, readers who write in critical letters to the editor, and then in some cases, whistleblowers or even the media. So focusing on publishing fast at volume has created a big problem. And the notion that immediate universal access to research is somehow better, meaning more democratic, that it's going to be self-correcting, is really proving out to be misguided and ultimately more expensive for the scholarly community as a whole. And then, as we've seen most pointedly recently, it's hurting the public. So speed is the area of the workflow that I would look at very carefully across the board.
Nikesh, it occurs to me that it's a great answer, Joy, and I totally agree. I think one of the things that as we wrote the book, we looked at how the tech culture insinuated itself into ours, right? Into scientific publishing culture, and they aren't compatible. And this is one way it did it. And what Joy hit on was how tech culture, especially when it manages content, tends to externalize the costs of managing that content onto the audience, right? It's like, we don't care. We're not going to really look at that closely. But if you get a crazy idea, or your aunt gets a crazy idea, or somebody gets into a fight over this, or somebody takes a drug they shouldn't take, or somebody, does something bad, or even, children self-harming and things like that, or, child, pornography. We don't want anything to do with that. We're externalizing the cost of monitoring that. And I think one of the things that we've done is we've externalized the costs of validating and evaluating scientific claims for specific communities. We've just thrown that out and externalized it. And I think that's one of the things Joy was getting at, if I'm not mistaken.
Just, I'm very curious about the book. So maybe, a question on that, Kent and Joy. So can you talk a little bit about the new book and how the internet disrupted science? So how did it come about? What should the readers expect? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. This is good practice for us because we just turned the book in a couple of weeks ago and had it accepted by the publishers. Very excited about it, in fact. So when we reconnected not even a year ago and cooked up this idea and realized we were sort of, no pun intended, on the same page, and started to write. And what we came across was this idea, again, that tech culture has subsumed scientific culture. And we have become very focused on technology-driven ideas, technology-driven paths to wealth or power or, what have you, to growth. And we've kind of left everything that we formerly stood for in the dust a bit. And so there are three basic sections to the book. The first one is this how science dies? And it talks about the volume problem, predatory publishers, a whole bunch of other things, how libraries were under attack and have continued to be, how universities have been under attack. And, it's only accelerated. So, and then the second section is called Hijacking Trust. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about trust, but how the trust in scientific publishers and scholarly publishers was basically hijacked, and how we let that happen. And, we talk about things, the illusions that people have about, and Joy referred to one of these, about what is democratizing, things that the tech world uses that word a lot to mean what works in our favor, right? What do we not have to pay attention to? But they don't like the fact that copyright is a democratic law, right? They don't like the fact that that Congress is a democratic body that could regulate them. They don't like actual democratic institutions. They're libertarians, or what do they call cyber libertarians. And so we talk a lot about that influence. And then we talk about kind of a worst case scenario and how we can avoid it. And that's how the book culminates. I'm very happy with it. I think it's the first time that somebody has kind of told what was surprising to me, at least, how sweeping a story it is. It was great exercise to put it together, but I don't know, Joy, did I do a good job of representing it?
You did a great job, Kent. And I'll add to that a little bit for context on just about the book itself. As part of the process, we first wanted to talk about some of the themes more broadly. And so we wanted to be guests on podcasts like yours to explain how to connect the dots between a lot of the problems that we were seeing in the scientific publishing industry and a little bit of the history behind it. Then we realized it was better to put it all into a book. And we thought at first it would be appropriate for a university press type audience, that it's a lot of inside baseball about, scholarly publishing that would be more of interest to academic audiences than the public. But as we went through the process of writing the books, putting together our own anecdotes, doing extensive research, and then also relating to what we're seeing in this day and age around us, we realized that it was much more appropriate for a trade audience. And when we sent it to a trade publisher, they immediately reacted to it, that it was important for more people to understand this story. And so the writing in the book is really geared towards people who may not know anything about scholarly publishing. We do have a lot of technical details here and there to hold it together. But I think anybody who's interested in how things work and science and things like that would get something out of it.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, I have not spent as much time as you have, Kent and Joy, but, having spent about 17, 18 years, I don't think I've had a lot of literature available out there in terms of, books which talk a little bit about the historical perspective, like you mentioned, Joy, which talks about, how the space has evolved, and more importantly, addressing some of the things that you mentioned, Kent. And, I think it'll be a fantastic read, and I'm sure, all the readers are looking forward to it. I was just talking to a publisher about 2 weeks back, Kent and Joy, and I they were just saying that it's been more than 200 years that, publishing has always been there. It's seen all sorts of, ups and downs and recessions and whatnot. Despite all of the changes that, we see right now, open access, technology, funding cuts, publishers will still survive. I mean, they'll figure out a way. They'll still do what they have to do. I don't know if what I'm asking, makes a lot of sense, Ken, Joy, but that's just something that kind of stayed with me. And I don't know if you have a perspective on this, and if it's in the book, and, if you need to kind of wait for the book to come out, that's fine as well. But just, any thoughts on, do you think this time it's a little different? Do you think, what everything that is stacking up is going to bring about a massive change?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. I think right now there's a lot more risk than there ever was. And I think it's much more existential, because I think one of the things, and I don't think this is spilling too many beans because I think this is a good one, but one of the things that we talk about, it's the last section of the book, is called an iron triangle in science. And Robert Mueller, former head of the FBI, was worried about organized crime, corrupt government officials, and companies having aligned interests so that they would create iron triangles that nobody could break apart. And you can imagine something like that glued together by technology that would exist, especially if you have producer pays publishing, which we'll talk about later. But I think that, if you have this influence of technology, it's much riskier. And you look at what's happening with RFK Jr., you look at what's happening with him thinking about starting what we're calling gaslight journals, them having funding by supplement companies and nutraceutical companies and people like that. Other, predatory publishers lurking around the edges. There's a risk that what people used to think of as scientific publishers, and we've seen this, and we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later. People are turning away from journals because they don't trust them like they used to. And they don't trust the form anymore because the form has been so corrupted. And then if you get to the point where RFK is, basically pushing articles through journals when they have DOIs and they are citable and all of that, or, things like that. And, who's going to trust anything coming from a journal? And I think that's why some of the major medical societies are starting to circle the wagons, because they realize that there's an existential threat to science. And that existential threat is exactly the same one that's heading toward publishers.
And it's much riskier because of the sheer concentration of content and of businesses that has happened over the years, both through mergers and acquisitions, but also through the connectedness via technology. And so when we're talking about what's going on with the United States National Institutes of Health and HHS under RFK Jr., what may have been 20 years ago, a US problem is now a global problem because it's so interconnected. The funding is interconnected, but the content and the means of accessing it are also interconnected. So through concentration, scholarly publishing has become a much softer target.
Ken, this one's for you. You've often talked about the difference between innovation and disruption. From your vantage point, how do we balance the need for stability with the push for bold change?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, I think one of the things to realize is that scientific and scholarly publishers are actually designed for stability. That's part of what we provide historically and where we were headed until we kind of tripped over our own technology shoelaces. So I would say also that I don't think change needs to be bold to be effective. I think it needs to be effective. And you need to know what you're trying to change. I think innovators test and measure effectiveness without destroying what's working. That's the balance, right? That's how innovation is a positive force, right? You do it carefully, you repeatedly measure acceptance, financial viability, ethical alignment, things like that. I think disruptors like the idea of move fast and break things. They don't necessarily test for effectiveness, financial viability, or ethical alignment. And so they will achieve one while compromising the other. And my thing is, and I've been saying this for years, we need to slow down and fix things. We don't need to move fast and break things. I think we've actually hurt ourselves in our markets, like we talked about earlier. I think users are turning away from journals. I think the idea of a journal has been degraded to the point that we have predatory journals, body snatcher journals, gaslight journals, mega journals. They aren't really focused on any particular audience, or they're designed to exploit that audience or the authors in that community. And some of them are downright antagonistic to actual science. So I think if we were to really innovate for scientific communities rather than trying to disrupt what should be a source of stability, which is deciding what goes into the scientific record and which scientific claims deserve a place there, that should be a stabilizing force, in my view, not something you just disrupt because you're in love with whatever technology is, the latest fad or the latest trend.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that response, Kent. And there's so many good things, but I specifically, when you say the change does not necessarily have to be bold, but it has to be effective. And yeah, really a lot to ponder about. Joy, from your perspective, do you think, are we investing our innovation capital in the right places? Or do you think we are getting distracted by all of these shiny tools and trends in the market?
Well, I like a shiny tool and trend as much as the next girl. And Ken and I both were known of even sharing panels at conferences for experimenting with new things that came out, building widgets and launching communities and trying things different ways online in ways that technology afforded us. And so there's nothing wrong with continuing to invest in certainly R&D, and I emphasize the R in R&D for emerging enabling technologies, especially those that are designed to improve quality outcomes and improve user experience. That said, what we see more of, though, are announcements around partnerships and press releases about a lot of add-on tech and its potential. They've really taken center stage as a sign of innovation for companies and organizations, because this is the narrative that's supposed to instill confidence in stakeholders, be they corporate shareholders, board members, or nonprofit leadership. Technology investments now more than ever are really being taken at face value as leading indicators of some kind of future success. A lot of these future successes are quite vague and unmeasurable and open-ended. What we don't see much reference to in scholarly publishing these days is customers. It's as if by putting content on the internet for free, we no longer need to practice any kind of rigor in terms of understanding who benefits from this content and why. Areas of investment that I think publishers could focus on a bit more are around flexible access control tools and supporting systems, and the people, the acquisitions editors, the salespeople, and the marketing teams that understand how to use access control and customer management tools to serve different markets. It's not quite as sexy talking about access control systems as AI flavored, fill in the blank new thing that's going to produce some great thing sometime. But arguably, I'd say it might be more effective approach for long-term portfolio management. And the reason I focus on access control systems here is that they allow for more transparency and accountability. Knowing who your customers are, whether at the discipline level, geographically, where they are on the spectrum from basic bench research to practitioners, that's what should be driving product development and also market offerings. And at the heart of it, publishers are businesses who create products out of information and deliver them to market. And I think we haven't really been well served by the rhetoric around access and paywalls being access is good and paywalls are bad, and relying on alternative metrics, what happens to your content out in the wild on the internet, to somehow inform us and provide meaningful insights into how people are using the content and why. And it's really influenced a lot of business models and practices that have mixed results. And some of those results are very, very bad and difficult, if not impossible, to undo. Happy customers and the money they bring in that support healthy operations, they're always shiny and trendy. So my advice is invest in tools and people that help you understand who your happy customers are.
Thank you, Joy. I love that. I know we briefly touched upon talking a little bit about trust, and I know that it's one whole section in the book as well, Ken and Joy. So, a couple of questions on that. To start with, Joy, with all the energy going into tech and AI, are we in real danger of underestimating the role of trust, both with the public and within the academic communities?
I think so. Following too closely on the coattails of tech, in particular AI, which is so volatile in the public. There are so many spikes and valleys in terms of public understanding and public trust of what AI is going to do at the societal level. By being right up there in the mix with scientific publishing, I think we could use a little bit more distance to wait and see how things are going to play out. To be trustworthy, I think we should be a little bit more independent and not quite as aligned with what's happening in real time.
Yep, I'd agree. I think, this kind of, in writing the book, we came across the, very obvious insight, but I don't think one we've actually articulated as clearly as we could, which is that tech and science have divergent goals. Tech wants to scale, science wants to discover. And discoveries can be small and important, or they can be big and important. It doesn't matter, but it's about revealing useful bits of nature. Tech's about a host of other priorities, a lot of them commercial or even political at this point. And so I think as Joy said, aligning ourselves with tech is actually a little perilous because we do look Me Too. We don't look like we're independent thinkers, like we're as smart as people hope we are, I guess, that we're followers and not leaders, and that we're just another industry that's just marching to the same, fife and drum of the tech industry. We're just following along, and we aren't really thinking for ourselves. So I think we've also underestimated the role of trust at a community level. I think we need to rebuild it within each scientific community, because science is not one thing. Science is very different for astronomers versus orthopedic surgeons. It's very different for agronomists and pediatricians. It means something very different, how it's applied, what the standards are, what the process for making it and trusting it is. And I think we need to serious up. I think we need to get serious again. And if we get serious again and start thinking for ourselves, then I think we'll get more downstream and societal trust as a result. But until we kind of stop goofing around with tech and stop following them like we are thoughtlessly being led by the nose to the AI water trough or whatever it is, I think then we're at risk of being kind of thrown in with everything else. It's just, oh, well, they don't have a idea of who they are either. They don't have a separate identity. They aren't doing anything different. So I think it's a really important thing. The way I think you gain trust, to me, is you do something unique and you do it very well. And you do something and you do it consistently, and people just, over time, you earn it. And it's so easy to unearn it. I think we were cavalier, and I think we unearned it.
In a way, we're a B2B industry that's been thrust into the B2C market, both by our own making and through external forces. We're the people who make the information to provide to the people who make the things, right? We should be behind the scenes, much like public health. You know it's working when you don't hear about it. We don't know how many pandemics have been prevented, how many disasters have never happened. Through the politicization and the publicification of scholarly publishing, we have put ourselves in a place where we're under much more scrutiny from the public that didn't, quite frankly, ever need to be the case.
So there is clearly an issue, like you've highlighted, Kent and Joy. From maybe a solutioning point of view, what are some concrete steps that publishers can take to rebuild trust? And this is not just about the peer review process, but across the entire life cycle of research communication.
Yeah, so I think if we seem serious again about quality and about scientific integrity, that's an important first step. And that means consistently serious about it, right? We have to rid ourselves of obvious conflicts of interest. I talk to people outside the publishing space, and they ask about what open access is. And I said, well, it's when, the way it's been realized through Gold Open Access is that publishers get paid when they publish papers. They're like, what? People outside the industry know that's a conflict of interest. They know there's no way that you can, have that in any other industry without it being seen as a conflict of interest. Historically, in postal regulations, that was called an ad, when somebody paid you to publish something and you had to count it in a different way. So I think we need to get serious about those kinds of things, because the public recognizes that, that we don't pass the sniff test at that. I think we have cyber libertarian beliefs about more information is better. And people know at a fundamental level that's not true. And so for us to be going around saying that looks like we're out of touch. We're cavalier about trust. We don't care. We're not serious. So I think that, concrete steps, I think we really need to think hard about the author pays model or huge disclosures around it, because I think that's a good way to back out of it which I do think we need to do. But if you start disclosing that, you're going to shut down some bad operators, right? Or you're going to know who they are because they won't want to disclose. I think we have to have indexing and peer review serious again. I think, frankly, National Library of Medicine has let us down. There are 3 extant quality measures for indexing in the NLM. There's PubMed, there's Medline, there's PubMed Central. They're different standards, and people can abuse that. I think preprint servers are a mistake, especially in health and medicine, because as they say, why do people exploit health and medicine preprints? Because why do thieves rob banks? Because that's where the money is. You're not going to have a lot of bad people trying to exploit an aeronautics preprint server. But health and medicine, sure, we'll do that all day long. I think funders need to be put back in their lane. Why we ever listen to them and let us bully them around is a really problematic history in my view. I think that was shameful, actually. It's like, why are we listening to you? You fund the science, stay out of our lane. We should have stood up to that. So I think, frankly, we've looked weak and feckless. And who would you trust somebody who looked that way, who could be pushed around easily, who isn't seen as a strong defender of what you think is right? And I think that's how we regain trust, is by being strong, committed, serious about scientific claims and about in each community.
I agree with that 100%. I think the more public-facing communication that's coming from the scientific publishing industry at this time, when our industry is publicly under attack, is making it worse. And in terms of restoring trust, I think a lot of the leading, most recognized publishers should think very carefully about how they are defending the forts in the public forum. And at this point, I really feel like less communication around the nuts and bolts and airing the dirty laundry of this particular industry, or making claims that require more defense is counterproductive. And so one way to restore trust might be to not only get serious, but get a little bit more quiet.
Yeah, stick to our knitting. We should do what we do. And, we're very suspect of anyone who goes to the public with claims about science. And I think there's kind of this view that it's kind of a self-loathing, that people are like, I'm going to go out and complain about something that's going on in this industry, and whistleblowers, hey, I love them. I'm one of them. That's legit, but you do it within the industry to correct the industry. You don't go, I've never written I don't think I've ever written an op-ed to, complain about this. We're writing a book, but it's a book that frankly, and, tells a story that we think people need to know about, and ends with kind of recommendations about a solution, because we think we finally have gotten to the point where we really need to engage everybody in this huge story that is 25 years in the making. But yeah, I totally agree with Joy. We have to, one of the things that we're seeing is there's just, again, a lot of kind of almost self-loathing. And it's from people who just don't want to be serious about this in a way.
Thanks, Kent and Joy. Just talking a little bit about open access, I don't know if it has brought massive shifts, but apparently it seems so. And you can maybe expand on that a little bit, Kent. But it has also brought maybe new tensions. And you've written about the unintended consequences of the open access business models. How do you see publishers adapting to these challenges while staying mission aligned?
Yeah, so I think the OA business models exhibited all the problems that when I first heard about, especially gold OA, but even green OA and all of this, that my spidey sense first really tingled. It's open to exploitation, it's open to predation, it's open for manipulation, it's been open for politicization. And I think we need to get back to, again, as Joy mentioned, knowing your community, accepting that people who want to use this content and who are qualified to use this content, it's okay to have them pay for that content, whether it's through a discounted membership or a apportionment of membership dues for the organization, or, through university licensing or whatever it is. But I think the new tensions that, have been unnecessary and kind of destructive. I mean, it solved really no problem. 98% of users had access to the scientific literature through subscriptions, licenses, or interlibrary loan when open access started. It's probably about the same, even at above 50% open access. It's created dozens of new problems. So I think publishers need to adapt, as Joy mentioned, talking about, new ways. You look at how other industries have dealt with this, right? They have flexible paywalls. They have special membership tiers. They have a whole bunch of innovation for making sure that users who want their content can get it in ways and price points and, recurring revenue schemes that they like. And I think that's perfectly fine and perfectly fair and a perfect way to size a market to do it. So my advice right now is, when it comes to open access, the best way to help the scientific claim space begin recovering, it's like the old adage, how do you start to fill a hole? First, stop digging.
So is there such a thing as a truly sustainable and equitable OA model, Joy? And if so, what might it look like?
So I really enjoyed listening to one of your recent episodes. You were in conversation with Godwin's Onwuchikwa, a community ambassador, I believe is his role at eLife. He so eloquently described a lot of the real world challenges around diversity, equity, inclusion, and his particular angle, which includes social justice. He described a lot of specific examples and general challenges around that in global academia and how it relates to publishing. Listening to that conversation, for me, really reinforced a phenomenon that we've seen play out over the years as open access, capital O, capital A, as a movement or a business model or what have you, has really been hoisted up like a big white tent covering nearly every aspect of academia and the publishing related activity that goes with it. And that phenomena is the following. The broader the open access tent gets, and the more specific tent poles that are hoisted up underneath it, the more completely out of control the circus underneath it becomes. Open access started with, let's get biomedical information out there for free. Then let's extend it. It kept growing and growing and growing. And it, as like a snowball, gathered a lot of other things underneath it. But when we're really talking about specific issues that are important, sustainability, equity, diversity, inclusion, and those sit right alongside with things like industrial development, getting new products to market, social progress, environmental awareness, geopolitical policies, healthy financial markets, entrepreneurship. All of these things are important factors in scientific publishing and academic pursuits. And these are all tent poles of their own, and they all have different requirements, create different opportunities for people. They involve different communities, and they have different economic drivers. And so to lump them all together and say, we need this, this, and this, and this, and end every sentence with open access, I think is erroneous at this point. To say open access is the solution for everything, for everyone, now just make the money work, or let's change the rules, or let's add new incentives, or create more punishments, or add a little bit more technology to fix the old technology that caused more problems. All of these are coming together and creating unintended consequences. All of this is ideology-led thinking when the punchline to every joke is open access. Right now, the industry has plenty of publication options for authors and funders. Anyone who wants to publish a paper on whatever topic for whatever reason, for whoever wants to read it, for whatever reason they want to read it or do something with it, can. The playing field is about as level as it could conceivably get, and it's a mess. And yet, we still need to work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. So my recommendation is just take open access out of the sentence as the default answer. Focus on the individual problems, the individual goals, and the individual stakeholders. Support the ability for discrete communities and organizations to define the challenges as they relate to their stakeholders, and support them in their abilities to propose solutions. Don't just rely on an overarching ideology that's been co-opted by a handful of businessmen and women in the US and Western Europe to come up with a solution that's going to solve all these problems for everyone.
So one of the things that occurred to, I've been always thinking ever since, 10, 15 years ago when I went down to Brazil, South America never had a chance to build a big subscription journals market, even though there is potential for one there, because everything was predicated on it has to be open access, right? And that kind of monoculture approach, I think, has stifled a lot of really good entrepreneurs, a lot of potentially strong publishing markets, a lot of really interesting diversity, a lot of fair chances for people to have the same success that other people have, which I would say is around the idea of equity. I get the same chance as anybody else. I have the freedom to try it. And I think that's one of the reasons that this is, this ideology is kind of incompatible with those goals.
Kind of digressing a little bit, Ken, but still relevant. Do you have any view on what, say a country like India is trying to do with the one nation, one subscription? And do you think it would be some of the same kind of pitfalls, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be too early to say. I think that they, again, it gets back to the earlier point. There are so few players now. There's been such consolidation that you can actually have something like that, where there used to be so many independent society publishers of significant size and with a lot of brain power that you wouldn't be able to have something like that. But now it's just a few players, which is another risk. So I think you could have that, but again, a lot of it's predicated on open access and access issues. But we'll see how it plays out. It's going to be interesting. It was interesting that it came into existence. It may be particular to that country. I don't know.
I would add to that a lot of these broad scale, countrywide, even transformative agreements that link access to content for readers to publication of content by authors within the same publisher or group of publishers. I find those very problematic because the crossover of producers of research information to the readers of information doesn't work that way. A very small percentage of people who read and use scientific and scholarly content are actually authors. So this is creating artificial bubbles around people and bundles of content and assuming things about their behavior to make it fit an economic model that suits the two parties who went to the negotiating table. So I'd be really interesting to see how these play out over time.
Absolutely. The next question is for both of you. Some say we've moved the paywall rather than removing it, especially when it comes to who can afford to publish. What's your take on this persistent imbalance?
I'll take a stab at that. So paywalls, there are incentives in paywalls, right? So I think when you have readers or consumers of information paying, that aligns the publisher with the reader, and it gives the reader leverage over the publisher. The publisher, with the Geyser, I'm always thinking, should I publish this? Is it worth it for these people? Is it good enough for me to, continue to keep their interest? I'm always thinking about that, and I'm watching that, open rates and click rates and retention rates and all that stuff. Am I still clicking with this reader group, with this community that I am trying to serve? So that's an incentive of having a paywall between the producer and the consumer, and you can judge, and the consumer then has leverage. I've had, some people say, I'm canceling because you said X. And I'm like, well, okay, well, but it doesn't happen anymore because I'm so aligned. But I think we also love our euphemisms, right? So we call it author pays, but it's really publisher gets paid by authors. If you put it that way, which is what it is, it's not so tasty. It's not so equivalent. It's not just moving the paywall. That's another euphemism. It was realigning incentives so that it became about how many transactions you can get from those authors, how many payments can the publisher get from authors. So I think it's much more gnarly, in a way, what that change was. I remember when people say it's just another business model. There's no such thing as just another business model. You shift from membership to subscription. That's a small change, but it has a whole bunch of implications. You shift from readers pay to authors pay. That's a huge change in business model with all sorts of incentive changes and ethical changes and all of that. So it's not that people are being forced to pay to publish. The problem is that the editors are being paid to accept papers because the publisher, and they know it, but they also can't see into it, as I talked about earlier. I think that if there were more disclosure, editors might have very different opinions about this pile of money that's just accumulating on the other side, and they don't know where it came from. If they knew who was paying for that paper to be published, that'd be interesting. But I think it's been a destructive realignment of incentives. I think it goes far beyond just moving a paywall.
And it's definitely a generational phenomenon as well, as two old people looking back and on history and writing a book. I'm acutely aware that there's a whole generation of scientists and early career academics and practitioners who only know a universe where open access has been promoted as a positive thing, as the best thing for you as an author, as the most magnanimous thing to do for your fellow scientists and practitioners around the world. And also, digital natives who grew up having everything at their fingertips. So we're not just being, grumpy old people who are out of touch with general content consumption, but we are trying to restore a little bit of levity and put some more facts back into the conversation around access control, paywalls, and how information is getting to people who need it and different ways that might happen.
Yeah. And I think to your point about grumpy old people, I think a lot of the open access advocates are now the grumpy old people. And but you look at the internet economy now, it's on the content side, it's mostly subscription driven.
Yeah, they've come back around and lapped us.
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to be current, you offer subscriptions, right? Amazon Prime subscription, Paramount Plus subscription, Netflix subscription, YouTube TV. I mean, you just go down the list. It's all subscription based. except for some social media could be. But, everything that, Zoom, you're paying a subscription for that, all of these teams and all of these things. The internet has become a huge subscription business when it comes to content acquisition. And we've been on an ideological island. And I think it's to our detriment, both financially and also when it comes to consolidation, but reputationally as well.
First, for you, Kent, from a leadership perspective, what has changed the most over the last decade, and how are leaders being called to show up differently now?
Yeah. First of all, Nikesh, I just want to compliment you on some great questions. So just before everybody tunes out while I talk about leadership, but these are great questions. I think a few things. One thing is there's less of it, right? There's less of it in two ways. Consolidation has decreased the number of leaders overall. So the brain trust in scientific and scholarly publishing is a lot smaller now. And as Joy said, it's more, peripheral. It's the people on the outside looking in saying, hey, what are you doing in there? And so I think, it's less diverse. There's less conversation. There's less networking. There's less uncertainty. I think another way it's changed is it's more technology chasing than it has been in the past. I don't think a lot of the leaders in scientific publishing that I've seen recently really understand what we're about. They understand how to position a content industry for, some profit taking, but they don't understand what we're about. And I think that the other thing is leadership's capitulated to external forces, as we discussed earlier, like funders and governments or advocacy groups. I don't know why I would respect a leader that capitulates to people who just want to use your resources for their own ends. I wouldn't. But I think what we're presumed to do matters a lot. And we have to get back to doing that to have potential future value. So I think right now leaders need to, actually lead instead of capitulate, compromise, or cop out. We've had too many people being silent in the face of one of the greatest assaults on science in the history of science. I've been absolutely astounded at how little outcry there has been about what is going on with everything in the scientific information space from scientific publishers. And I know we said earlier, maybe just be quiet, but this is one area where you might want to be loud. Because again, if you want to regain trust, show you're serious. Don't kvetch about, my paper didn't get published fast enough, or I'm not getting the kind of, or this APC is too high. That's the kind of stuff that is just silly. But let's get serious again. This is one of the greatest assaults on science since probably ever. And where are the leaders in scientific publishing? I mean, I'd guess they're at an AI conference, but who knows?
And I would add to that more salespeople, fewer tech people in leadership roles. Publishing is selling content, regardless of how it's paid for or who pays for it. Let's have more sales mindsets rather than using technology to conform with other people's mandates. And the leadership that we have in place should use the powers that they control, which are the board members of Crossref, of Orchid, of Chorus, the people who have paid for and continue to pay the dues for the infrastructure that makes scientific publishing run. Companies like yours who are part of the supply chain. You're very powerful. Use the power that you have to protect what you can protect and align with like-minded organizations. For the predators and others who are coming in, use the power of the purse and the vote to keep them out.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Joy and Ken. If you had the option to redesign the scholarly publishing ecosystem from scratch, what would you prioritize and what would you leave behind?
I'll dive in. So I would prioritize business models that work for communities of all sizes. That's what really made it work for so long and allows for the diversity that we want. And also for, being really focused on what a particular branch of the scientific process, what people in that branch are trying to do. Generally, that's recurring revenues. I would also say protect copyrights. Copyrights are democratic. They're democratically, arrived at. They're part of most democratic countries' constitutions or basic law set. So why we let copyrights be taken over by cyber libertarians who said, no, code is law or whatever. Publishers are in a great position to protect copyrights. And when they do that, they also protect the integrity of the scientific record. Now, my experience with protecting copyright is it's always because somebody's trying to abuse or manipulate the scientific record through abuse of some copyrighted item. And publishers can detect that. They can scare off those people. They can take them to court more effectively. And I think that, again, if we're talking about democratizing, you have to actually do things that a democracy has on the books. You have to uphold the laws that the democracy you're in has on the books. So I would leave behind Creative Commons. I would also say we need to privilege peer review again. We've deprivileged it. So we have public preprints. Why? Why are they public? Why are they persistent? Why do they have DOIs? Why any of those things? It makes zero sense. So I would put technology in its place. I love it. I absolutely love it. But it has some bad tendencies toward monopoly. And one of the things that we came across in the book that I hadn't quite articulated, but I think it had been on my mind, it has a tendency toward governance. It has a tendency toward imposing rules on society. And you barely feel them until all of a sudden you're only behaving in a certain way. And it's because the technology painted you into a corner. I had to search on something today to help somebody out. And I'm like, my algorithms are going to be poisoned for the next week because the algorithms they're governing what I see. And technology is at such a scale right now, it has a tendency toward governance. So I think we need to shake that off too and really just get back to focusing on communities, put tech in its place, align our interests with the consumers of information, and be happy with sometimes small communities are fine. It doesn't, not everything has to scale. We don't have to try to walk in, tech shoes all the time. We can be our own best selves. So that's what I'd say. But Joy?
I would take the Marie Kondo approach. Are you familiar with her? Her philosophy is for decluttering, right? Look at everything you're doing. And if it doesn't bring you joy, throw it away. Get out the garden shears and cut the cords. If you're connecting your content anywhere that is not providing value to your company in terms of serving a community, your subscribers, turn it off. You can always turn things back on. It doesn't cost a lot to do less. So try doing a little bit more with less. Go on a diet, work out, get your health levels back up where you would pass the fitness test. And be confident in your human experts that you've invested in within your company. Lean more on them and then use the technology to support them again. That's what I would do.
Brilliant. I love that. So that was a very powerful and thought-provoking conversation, from questions of innovation and trust to the evolving nature of leadership and access. Kent and Joy have given us plenty to reflect on. And some, I think I initially mentioned bold ideas, but I love the fact, Kent, once again, that you mentioned bold yet effective ideas to carry forward. We also spoke about the upcoming book, How the Internet Disrupted Science. I, for one, am really, really looking forward to it. And I'm sure all the listeners are looking forward to it as well, especially, after hearing this episode and some snippets that we've already spoken about. So a huge thank you to both you, Kent, and Joy for joining us on Insights Exchange and sharing your honest and insightful perspectives.
Thank you, Nikesh.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share Insights Exchange with your network. And stay tuned. Next week, we'll be diving into another facet of the research ecosystem with a new guest and some new questions. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge.